The air was thick with the kind of heat that clings to your skin, a suffocating August afternoon that made every breath feel like a chore. I was in the kitchen, slicing tomatoes for dinner, when the sound of raised voices sliced through the quiet of our home. My knife paused mid-cut, and a chill ran down my spine despite the warmth. Dropping everything, I hurried to the front door, my heart already pounding with a mix of dread and instinct. Outside, on the neatly trimmed lawn of our gated community, stood Clara, our dialysis nurse, her medical bag slung over her shoulder, her face flushed with frustration. Blocking her path was Meredith, the newly appointed vice president of the Homeowners Association, her posture rigid, a manicured finger jabbing the air like a weapon. "This is a private community," Meredith snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You have no authorization to park that car here, and you certainly don't have permission to waltz in unannounced." I froze for a split second, my mind racing. Clara wasn't just any visitor, she was the lifeline keeping my mother, Evelyn, alive. 3 times a week, like clockwork, she arrived to administer the dialysis treatments that filtered toxins from my mother's blood, treatments that couldn't be delayed without risking her life. Any disruption could send her potassium levels spiking or her lungs filling with fluid. I stepped onto the porch, forcing my voice to stay calm despite the fire igniting in my chest. "Meredith, she's here for my mother's medical treatment. This isn't optional." But Meredith barely glanced at me, her eyes narrowing at Clara. "We have rules," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "No one informed me about a nurse. If she doesn't have a pass, she's not coming in." The audacity of it hit me like a punch. This wasn't about parking or passes, this was about control, about Meredith flexing her newfound power over our lives. I wanted to scream, to tell her exactly what I thought of her petty tyranny, but I bit my tongue. I wasn't just Evelyn's son. I was a federal health inspector, someone who spent my days ensuring medical facilities across 3 states followed regulations to protect patients like my mother. I knew the law, and I knew how to play the long game. For now, I needed to get Clara inside. "We'll sort this out later," I said, my voice low but firm. "Clara, come with me." I guided her past Meredith, who stood there fuming, her arms crossed like a sentinel guarding some imaginary kingdom. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of antiseptic, a reminder of the medical reality that defined our days. My mother was propped up in her recliner, an oxygen tube looped under her nose, her breathing shallow but steady. Her eyes flickered open as we entered, a weak smile crossing her face. "What's all the fuss, Daniel?" she asked, her voice frail but curious. I forced a grin, brushing off the encounter. "Just a misunderstanding, Mom. Nothing to worry about." But as Clara set up the dialysis machine, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, I could see the strain in her expression. She'd been coming here for months without issue until Meredith decided to make our lives her personal battlefield. We'd moved to this community, Willow Grove, 6 months ago, lured by the promise of quiet streets and a safe place for Mom to recover after a kidney failure. The manicured lawns and friendly waves from neighbors had seemed like a fresh start after years of hospital visits and uncertainty. But we hadn't anticipated the HOA, a machine of bureaucracy that seemed to thrive on control. Meredith, with her sharp suits and sharper tongue, had taken it to a new level since her election. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was rewriting them to suit her whims, and now she'd set her sights on us. Once Clara had the machine humming and Mom settled, I stepped outside to check on Clara's car. Meredith had claimed it was parked in a no-standing zone, but there wasn't a single sign to indicate that. The curb near our house was bare of markings, and the HOA hadn't bothered to designate visitor parking anywhere nearby. Sure enough, a neon green violation notice was slapped on Clara's windshield, the ink still fresh. I snapped photos of the ticket, the curb, and the surrounding area, my jaw tightening with every click. This wasn't just an inconveniency, it was harassment, plain and simple. I tucked my phone away, already planning my next move. That night, after Mom was asleep, I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop casting shadows across the room. I pulled up Willow Grove's bylaws, combing through pages of dense legalese for anything that could justify Meredith's actions. What I found was worse than I'd expected. A recent amendment, pushed through under Meredith's influence, required all commercial service providers to register with the HOA 72 hours in advance. There was no exception for medical professionals, no acknowledgement of emergencies. It was as if they deliberately crafted a trap to fine anyone who dared prioritize health over protocol. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, itching to fire off a complaint, but I held back. I needed more than outrage, I needed evidence. The next morning, I was jolted awake by a sharp knock at the door. A red envelope protruded from the mailbox, its edges crisp and official-looking. I opened it to find a notice from the HOA, signed by Meredith herself, demanding that we cease all unauthorized medical visits or face fines of $100 per violation. The letter cited new security guidelines and included a form for Clara to register as a vendor, complete with a processing fee. I stared at the words, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't just about parking Anna Maria, it was a direct attack on my mother's survival. I crumpled the paper in my fist, then smoothed it out, knowing I'd need it for what was coming. I spent the day talking to neighbors, careful to keep my tone casual. Most were hesitant to speak openly, their eyes darting toward Meredith's house down the street. But a few cracked open their doors and their stories. Mrs. Ellison, a widow in her 70s, whispered about a $50 fine she'd received when her physical therapist parked too close to her driveway. Mr. Torres, a retired mechanic, admitted he'd paid $200 to avoid a fight after Meredith claimed his granddaughter's visiting nurse had disrupted community aesthetics. Each story fueled my resolve, painting a picture of a woman who thrived on intimidation, backed by an HOA board too spineless or complicito rein her in. By evening, I was back at my desk, drafting a letter to the HOA board. I didn't mention my job, yet that card was best played later. Instead, I cited federal laws protecting patients' rights to medical care, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, which required reasonable accommodations for essential services like dialysis. I warned that obstructing Clara's visits could expose the HOA to legal liability. I printed the letter on plain paper, keeping it anonymous for now, and slipped it into the HOA's Dropbox under the cover of darkness. Let them sweat a little, I thought. But Meredith wasn't one to back down. 2 days later, Clara called me in a panic as I was driving home from the grocery store. "They won't let me through the gate," she said, her voice trembling. "Meredith's here with security. They're saying I'm trespassing." My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I floored the gas, weaving through traffic to reach Willow Grove in record time. When I pulled up, the scene was worse than I'd imagined. Clara stood by her car, clutching her medical bag, while Meredith loomed nearby, flanked by 2 guards who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. I jumped out of my car, leaving the engine running. "Move," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "This is a medical emergency. You're violating federal law by blocking her." Meredith's eyes narrowed, but I saw a flicker of doubt. She opened her mouth to argue, then thought better of it, waving the guards aside with a huff. "This isn't over," she muttered, storming off as I escorted Clara to our house. My mother was waiting, her face pale, her breathing more labored than usual. Clara worked quickly, hooking up the machine, but I could see the toll this was taking on her. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered later, her eyes glistening. "I have other patients, Daniel. This is too much." Her words hit me like a brick. Clara wasn't just a nurse, she was a hero, juggling multiple patients with grace under pressure. If Meredith's harassment drove her away, we'd be scrambling to find a replacement, and Mom's health couldn't afford the gap. That night, I made a decision. No more playing nice. I pulled out my official letterhead from the Department of Health and Human Services, the kind that made bureaucrats sit up straight. I typed a formal complaint detailing every incident in the notices, the gate confrontation, the bylaws that ignored medical necessity. I cited statutes, case law, and ADA provisions, making it clear that the HOA's actions weren't just unethical but illegal. I sent copies to the county health department, the state attorney general's office, and, for good measure, the Office for Civil Rights. The next morning, I hand-delivered the letter to the HOA clubhouse, a pretentious building with foam marble columns that screamed self-importance. Meredith was there, sorting through papers, and for a moment, her smug facade cracked when she saw the letterhead. "What's this?" she demanded, snatching it from my hand. I smiled, letting the weight of my title sink in. "Read it carefully, Meredith. You're playing with fire." Her eyes darted over the page, and I saw the first real hint of fear. She recovered quickly, tossing her hair. "We'll see about that," she said, but her voice lacked its usual venom. The days that followed were a blur of tension and small victories. Notices kept arriving, $50 for unapproved foot traffic, $75 for unauthorized equipment, but I collected them like ammunition, forwarding each one to my attorney, a sharp-witted woman named Rachel who specialized in civil rights cases. I also reached out to a friend at a local news station, Emma, who was hungry for a story about HOA overreach. "This is gold," she said, her voice crackling with excitement. "Can we interview you and Clara? Maybe get some neighbors on camera." I hesitated, worried about dragging Mom into the spotlight, but the chance to expose Meredith was too good to pass up. We set a date for the following week. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was stirring. Mrs. Ellison slipped me a note about a secret meeting at her house, where a dozen residents gathered to share their grievances. There was Mr. Torres, who'd been fined for his nurse's visits, Sarah, a young mother hit with a $100 penalty for her son's speech therapist, and James, a retired firefighter who'd been threatened with eviction over a ramp for his wheelchair-bound wife. Their stories mirrored mine, and for the first time, I felt the spark of a collective fight. "We're not just taking this anymore," James said, his voice steady. "Let's hit them where it hurts publicly." The news crew arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning, setting up on my front lawn. Emma, the reporter, was all business, her questions sharp but empathetic. I spoke about Mom's condition, the dialysis that kept her alive, and the HOA's relentless harassment. Clara, off-duty but fierce, described the stress of being stopped at the gate, her patients' lives hanging in the balance. Just as we wrapped up, Meredith appeared, her face a mask of fury. "No media on HOA property," she shouted, oblivious to the fact that we were on my private lot. Emma calmly invited her to comment, but Meredith spat, "I don't talk to vultures," and stormed off-right into the camera's frame. It was a gift we couldn't have planned. The segment aired that night, and Willow Grove exploded. Social media buzzed with outrage, neighbors sharing their own HOA horror stories. The county scheduled an emergency hearing, and suddenly, Meredith's iron grip was slipping. At the hearing, the room was packed residents, reporters, even a state health official I'd worked with years ago. Meredith's attorney, a slick man in an overpriced suit, argued that the HOA was within its rights to regulate access. But I was ready. I presented a binder of evidence, violation notices, photos, videos, and a detailed timeline of harassment. I cited federal and state laws, my voice steady as I reveal my role as a health inspector. "If this doesn't stop," I said, "the federal government will get involved." One by one, neighbors stood to testify. Mrs. Ellison spoke of her therapist's fines. James described the ramp dispute. Sarah broke down, recounting how her son's therapy had been delayed. The commissioners' faces grew grim, and when they finally spoke, their verdict was clear. The HOA's rules were likely illegal, and they need to be rewritten to include medical exemptions. They warned of further investigations if the board didn't comply. Meredith sat stone-faced, her attorney whispering furiously in her ear. 2 days later, a memo arrived under every door. Meredith had resigned for personal reasons, and all medical-related fines were suspended pending an audit. Whispers spread that the audit had uncovered financial irregularities, unexplained expenses, questionable reimbursements. The treasurer, Meredith's ally, quit soon after, and a new board was elected, one that prioritized transparency and compassion. They drafted bylaws ensuring medical access, even installing a welcome table at the gate for visitors like Clara. Mom's treatments continued without a hitch, and the neighborhood began to heal. Mrs. Ellison started a gardening club. James organized fire safety checks. Sarah launched a support group for parents. One evening, as I trimmed the hedges, I saw Meredith packing boxes into a moving van. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I thought she might say something, anger, regret, anything. But she just turned away, her shoulders slumped. I felt no satisfaction, only relief that her reign was over. Life settled into a new rhythm. Clara came and went, greeted with smiles instead of citations. Mom's health held steady, and she even started sitting on the porch, waving to neighbors as they passed. The community we'd hoped for when we moved here was finally taking shape, not perfect, but real. I kept my complaint letter pinned to my office wall, a reminder of what we'd overcome and a promise to never let anyone threaten Mom's care again. Meredith's name faded from conversation, but her legacy lived on as a cautionary tale. Power without compassion is a house of cards, and a united community can topple it with the truth. Word count, 2,987. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.